Okay, thank you very much. Just want to make sure, yep, my camera is on and hopefully my speaker is as well. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for giving me the opportunity to speak today about the situation in Sudan. Obviously, the crisis is extremely dire. Just to kind of situate it, Sudan is a country of 46 million people. Obviously, many of those people live in urban areas, and most, if well, not most, but 7 to 10 million people are estimated to live in Khartoum itself, where the heaviest fighting is occurring. So we are facing a very, very dramatic humanitarian situation that is only going to escalate if the fighting continues, which I believe is unfortunately the likely scenario. What we have right now is we have an existential conflict between General Burhan and the Sudanese armed forces, the SAF, and General Hemeti and his rapid support forces. And frankly, I have not seen any kind of change in the balance of forces or the balance of fighting to suggest that either of them is going to back down and in the near term. We also have another problem in that neither army is in a position to win this war anytime soon. So we are again looking at a grinding stalemate, which could be a huge problem. And last but not least, while people are kind of focusing on the fact that it is General Hemeti and General Burhan who are the leaders of these two armies, and I say so advisedly, uh, all the indications we have is that command and control is starting to break down, and that we will likely see the fragmentation of these armed forces occurring over the interim, and that this is going to complicate any effort to try to achieve a peace in the future. Now, just to situate it for people, what I normally like to do is present or three scenarios for the midterm for Sudan. The first, which is obviously the ideal, is that somehow international pressure is able to convince both General Burhan and Hemeti to return to the negotiating table to negotiate a ceasefire that is sustained and then are able and willing to agree to a transition to civilian transitional government that would then continue preparations for elections and hopefully a civilian and inclusive government after a vote. Unfortunately, given where we are now, I believe that that is probably the least likely scenario. I believe the two other scenarios I am going to describe are going to be much, much more likely. One of the scenarios I think is quite likely, and which is unfortunately the most problematic, is what I call the Lebanon scenario, which is where you have external actors supporting the different armed parties and essentially enabling both parties to continue to sustain pretty intensive conflict, not just in Khartoum, but in other parts of the country. If that's the case, that would probably make cities like Khartoum increasingly untenable for most people, and you would see massive refugee flows into the countryside and across the border into neighboring states, the Middle East, and probably also onto Europe. This would be an unmitigated humanitarian disaster that I think no one is prepared for, but that we should face starkly and should recognize is a real possibility. Another somewhat similar scenario, but just as concerning, would be that we do see the SAF ultimately prevailing because of its heavy weapons and light and air power, being able to expel the SRF from Khartoum, but not being defeated definitively, probably regrouping in Darfur, where most of its troops are from, and essentially creating a de facto autonomous Darfur state that would then create all the conditions we had seen previously in the 2000s during the first civil war in Darfur, and all the attendant local violence, atrocities, and unrest that troubled that part of Sudan 20 years ago. That, of course, would also be an unmitigated disaster, would also mean that the country is destabilized. And not just Sudan would be destabilized, but larger parts of the region, again, precipitating a major humanitarian crisis. Faced with these scenarios, I think we have to think very, very carefully about very difficult decisions that people may need to make when people will have to kind of balance the need to stop this fighting with a question of, whom or what should we do? Unfortunately, I think just putting pressure on both sides may not be enough to get the parties to negotiate in good faith, and that probably more will be necessary to force the different parties to recalibrate their calculations, either in Jeddah or some other negotiating position. And they will have to think very, very carefully about what is going to be required to change the balance of power, and then change the balance or the negotiating positions. I have argued in the past that the best way to do that is to try to get the main countries where General Burhan and General Hemeti hold their money, that is the Gulf states, to freeze bank accounts and to stop their activities in an effort to starve the ability of these people to continue to fight. And I believe that that is something that international partners should be trying to do. They should be trying to do that in coordination so that there is a united response. And hopefully that is something that countries will be working towards over the near term so that we can stop the fighting as soon as possible. Thank you.